Today I'm going to be talking and showing you some examples about the stages of clay. The stages of clay are a series of changes that happen to the clay while you're working on it, and I want you to be aware of these stages. This information will be on a quiz, but more importantly, it's information that you really need to understand to work with clay and to make successful projects. So I'm going to go through the stages and show you some examples of each one and try to describe what each stage means, and also explain what you need to watch out for or just be aware of for each of the stages. So the first stage of clay is mud. So you have all become familiar with mud. Here it is right here. This is kind of where we start with clay. So clay, usually when you find it, it's in this stage, which is mud. The thing I want you to remember about mud is it has the most water in it. So unfortunately there's so much water in it that we really can't use it for anything as far as building goes. It just doesn't hold its shape very well. It's really sticky. So our goal is to kind of move past that first stage of mud and get it into a stage that is easier for us to work with. So mud is the first stage. The second stage is called plastic. Here's a piece of plastic clay. So you can see it's really easy to squish and mold and shape into different things. And the reason we call it plastic, it means it's workable. So plastic is the stage that you're going to be using to build all of your projects in Ceramics 1. So you'll get very familiar with the plastic stage, but just remember that that word plastic means workable. So this is the most workable stage that we will have. So you will be building all of your projects when the clay is at this stage called plastic. That's stage 2. So after you've built something out of plastic clay, there are different techniques for working with plastic clay. There are things that we call hand building. You can use techniques called pinch, coil, slab. There's some other methods that can be used to create things, but those are the 3 basic hand building techniques. And then you could also use the potter's wheel, which is something we would do in Ceramics 2. All of those methods for building things with clay would be using the plastic stage for building. So whatever we decide to do, we build our project out of plastic clay, and then as we're building it, the water is evaporating out of the clay because it's sitting outside of a bag, and so the water is able to evaporate. And as it does that, the clay starts to get a little tighter and it's less easy for us to work with. So what happens is eventually that clay goes past this stage of plastic and it starts to dry and set up a little bit more. And once it does that, we call it the next stage, which is leather hard. So this is a piece of leather hard clay. It's not dry. I can still push my thumb into it. It's still soft enough to where I can move it a little bit, but it's definitely not as workable as the plastic stage. Okay, so if I try to bend this, it eventually will start to crack apart. The good thing about it is, if I was going to carve something into the surface, this is a great stage to use because it keeps kind of a cleaner line when you carve. I could actually attach these 2 pieces together, and I will talk about the technique for attaching, but making attachments definitely can happen still during this leather hard stage. And the good part of leather hard is it kind of holds its shape a little better. So if you get your project to a point where you don't really want it to change too much and you don't want the shape to change, this is kind of what you want it to get to so that it holds its shape better. But we can still attach things to it. We can carve, and we can clean up our details and things like that while it's at the leather hard stage. So at some point we've attached everything to this, we've cleaned up our details, we've done any sort of carving, some surface kind of decorations on it, and then at some point we're going to take this and we're just going to let our projects dry out. So we're going to unwrap them, take them out of the plastic bag, let all of the water evaporate out of the clay, and then it's going to enter into the next stage, the 4th stage, which is bone dry. So bone dry clay looks like this. You can kind of see the color difference. mud is kind of a darker color. This is still gray, but it's much lighter in color, and it doesn't look wet. There's no reflection coming off of it. If I take the leather hard piece, you can still see a little bit of shininess to the surface. If I tilt it into the light, you can kind of see that shininess. But this bone dry piece has lost all of that. It's very, very dry and chalky looking. The things I want you to know about bone dry is, one of them is, this is the most brittle stage. So this is when your projects are very easy to break. And the thing is, we don't want to break them, so when you get your projects to the bone dry stage, I want you to be extra careful with those so that we don't break something. The other problem with bone dry is it's very difficult to get this to go back together. If you break it, we can't really fix it. If your project was leather hard and it broke or something happened to it, we could probably repair it. But once it gets to the bone dry stage, there's not much we can do to put it back together. So be extra careful when your projects enter stage 4, which is bone dry. I did want to mention, the nice thing about clay is, up to this point, the only thing that's happened, that's changed, is the amount of water in it. So we had mud first, that had the most water. Then we had plastic, which had a little less water than mud, still flexible. Then a little more water came out and it turned leather hard. And then we let all of the water out and we got to bone dry. So the thing that we can always do is add water again. So I can take this piece of bone dry clay and I can set it into some water, and it will absorb all that water again and it will turn back into mud. So it just takes a few minutes actually, and that clay will soften up again, reabsorb all that water, and then turn back into mud. The nice thing about that is it means we can recycle old projects or things that didn't work, and we can reuse that clay. We don't have to throw it away. So it's a nice feature of working with clay, is that we can always kind of recycle. So I'm going to let that sit in the water for a few minutes and show you a few other things. So right here I have a piece of pottery. This will be called greenware. Greenware just means it has not been fired yet. Okay, so this is just like bone dry clay. You see the color is the same, and it's a pot, so it was made into something, but this has not been fired yet. So I can't really use this yet. I can't eat out of this, and it would just dissolve if I got it wet. So it's not really into its finished form yet. We still would call this clay, but not ceramic. So in order for something to be called ceramic, we have to heat it up in the kiln, and we have to take it up to a certain temperature so that it becomes ceramic. So I'm going to talk about that step next. So we take our projects once they're bone dry and we put them inside the kiln. And when we put them inside the kiln, we're going to take them out after they've heated, and now the clay has turned into something different. The color has changed. It's not gray anymore. It's more of a pink or tan color. Kind of a whitish, off-white color, and it is now very strong. I can't really break this now as I could when it was bone dry. So what has happened in that firing process is the clay has now changed chemically. Before it just lost water. Now we've changed this whole thing. So if I was to put this into my container of water, it is not going to turn back into mud. All it's going to do is get wet, but it won't change back into mud. You can see how this piece that I put in is already starting to dissolve into mud again. But once we fire this, this is called bisque fire. The bisque fire that we're going to do here at Warsaw is to 1888 degrees Fahrenheit. The other temperature that we will talk about again is called cone temperature, and this is fired to cone 05. So that's the temperature of our bisque firing. So here's a bowl that has been bisque fired. Okay, you can kind of see how that looks. And you know it's been fired if I tap it. It kind of makes a little ring. Okay, so you know that something's been fired if it rings when you tap it. If I take this bone dry cup, just kind of has a dull thud to it. It doesn't really ring. So that tells you that something has been fired when you snap it and you hear that little ringing sound. So now what we would do is we would take this bowl and we would put some decorations on it, some glazes, and sorry for my focus there, but we would put some different glaze colors on it, and then we would put it back in the kiln for a second firing. And once it comes out of that firing, it has changed again, and now we have something that is this color. You can see the color of the clay has gotten a little bit darker, more of a tan color, and this has a color of glaze over it, so you can see that shiny surface of melted glaze on top of the clay. So this piece of clay has been glaze fired. That is the next step. Okay, the stage that we call glaze fired. The temperature of that is 2,194 degrees Fahrenheit. And in ceramic temperature, we measure in cones, so this would be cone 6, not 06, just cone 6. I will show you some more information about the firing temperatures and what cone means and why we use that for ceramic temperatures. But just know that this has been fired to kind of its highest temperature, and this is when we would say the pot has been completely fired and finished, and it is now ready. You can use it for food. It's going to last for thousands of years. We have examples of really beautiful pots from thousands of years ago, so we know this is going to be around for a long time, and it's a very sturdy material once it's been taken to this high temperature. So an example of this would be a finished bowl like this, and this bowl, if I tap it with my finger, has a nice ring to it. Okay, so that's a finished piece of pottery. It's been glaze fired, and now it's going to be around for a long time, so we need to take care of it. I do talk to my students about the seventh stage. What happens after this? Really, the only thing this could ever be is broken. So we want to take care of the things that we make, even though they're really strong and really durable and they'll last for 1,000 years. If you drop it on the sidewalk or you hit it with a hammer, it's going to shatter, it's going to break. So it's not invincible, even though it's very durable and it lasts a long time. You still want to take care of things. And so again, the stages of clay. Mud has the most water. Plastic is when you're going to be building all of your projects. Leather hard is when you are making attachments or carving and making repairs and finishing. We let it dry until it is bone dry and all the water has left. After that, we would put it in the kiln. We would take it to bisque fire temperature, which is cone 05 or 1888 Fahrenheit, and then we would decorate it with glazes, and we would put it back in the kiln for the glaze fire. That would be 2194 Fahrenheit or cone 6. And then I just like to remind you that you want to still take care of it after that, because you could still break it. The last thing I'll show you is this piece of clay that I put in earlier. You can see it's now kind of dissolved back into mud now, and that's one of those nice things that we can do with ceramics is recycle.